In October of 2024, the Game Kitchen released the Mea Culpa DLC for Blasphemous II, which, along with adding some new and old items, added a new chapter and ending to the story of the Penitent One. This chapter is, of course, told through character dialogues and cutscenes, but frustratingly, there's also some information about one of the most important characters of the DLC that isn't in the game and is very hard to find online, making this character and his story seem shallow, which affects the rest of the DLC's lore as a result. In an effort to clear up the confusion and help tell the story in full, let's go through the information so that we can see the lore and story of the Mea Culpa DLC for Blasphemous II. Obviously, spoilers are ahead, so take this as your warning. With that out of the way, let's get started. It all starts when the Penitent One, while undertaking his quest in the base part of the game, comes across a door of mud over a large grate on the ground. As he approaches the edge of the grate, the voice of a woman calls to him from below, asking him to come down to her and set her free. He fights through the monsters ahead of him and finds the source of the voice, a woman named Hilaria. At one point in the past, Hilaria was the subject of a blessing, healing a dying man of his mortal wounds after rubbing mud on him. What happened to her next isn't clear, but eventually she was trapped within the mud of this pit. But now that the Penitent One has opened the door to her chamber, figures made from clay, which are Hilaria's prayers made manifest, rise from the earth and help her out of the mud. They now usher her on a journey across the land, and Hilaria is compelled to follow them. As the Penitent One also sets out to continue his own journey, a man named Asterion gazes down at him from where he stood a short time before. There is nothing in the game that explains where Asterion comes from or what his background is. However, as mentioned in this video by the Lore Hunter, there were a number of secret achievements added to the game in a patch before the release of the DLC, achievements which are unavailable to read now as far as I know, that could possibly speak to his origin. They describe a set of 9 disciplines of some unnamed brotherhood which detail the ritual of succession between the master of the brotherhood and his student. It begins with a deadly duel between the master and his disciple, the outcome of which is inevitably going to lead to the master's demise, but also signifies the student has completed his training. The student then undergoes a series of rituals to complete his ascension. He embalms the body of his former master. He weeps over the body and stores the tears in a lacrimatory he will wear around his neck. He constructs a weapon that will not only be a tool of war, but will also house his former master's embalmed body. And he consecrates the weapon with his own blood to signify the continuation of the lineage of the master, now passed to the student. Finally, he kneels and prays over the weapon, waiting to be judged by the spirit of his master as well as all of the masters who came before him, who test the pupil to judge his worth. If the student has performed all the rituals correctly and passes all the tests, then he will receive the blessing of the ancestors and hear the voice of his former master from the other side of the dream. His former master will assign him a mission, which the student will accept by rubbing his lips with sacred ashes. He will then set out on a pilgrimage to complete the mission of his master, going anywhere, no matter how far, in order to do so. While these disciplines obviously pertain to Asterion, seeing how his design matches several of them, since they're not mentioned in-game and were patched out of the achievements, their canonicity could be called into question, meaning they may end up being changed or not applying to Asterion at all in the future. In any case, whether they apply to him or not, as Asterion stands by the grate, he comments on a task given to him by his master, who was nothing more than a shriveled corpse and his sword, which is to follow the Penitent One. As the Penitent One continues on his journey, he encounters Hilaria at several other places in the land. Meanwhile, Asterion undergoes a journey of his own, tailing the Penitent One, guided by his master. Eventually, after several meetings, Hilaria tells the Penitent One that a solemn presence has approached her and whispered in her ear. Compelled to comply with the task given to her, Hilaria sends the Penitent One to her tomb, which will be the site of their final meeting. While the Penitent One is kept in the dark about what this meeting will bring, Asterion, through the whisperings of his master, knows the Penitent One is about to obtain something old and sacred from a place close in distance, but distant in essence. The first destination is, of course, Hilaria's tomb. The second, more mysterious one is revealed after after the Penitent One meets Hilaria. She takes him to the other side of the dream, where he meets an old companion, Chrysanta of the Rapt Agony, who presumably was the presence mentioned by Hilaria. Chrysanta reveals to the Penitent One that upon her death, which was the call that stirred him from his rest, she departed to this dream where she was in a sort of purgatory. She was neither living nor dead, yet also safe from the meddling of the miracle. This allowed her to return an item of his that she has watched over since the start of his slumber all those years ago. The hilt of Mea Culpa, his old sword which dissolved after the defeat of the High Wills. She tells him that he must restore Mea Culpa by replicating the moment of its creation, pulling it from a chest of repentance, yet one that is free from guilt, and then use it to stop the child of the miracle and the entity's return. She asks him to remember her in that final moment and to call upon her, as she is now guilt made manifest, just like Mea Culpa was. Their conversation is then interrupted when Asterion, back in the real world, gores the Penitent One through the chest, throws him to the ground, and takes Mea Culpa's hilt for himself, the completion of the task assigned to him by his master. He then sets off to find out how to restore Mea Culpa. A short time later, the Penitent One is restored to life by some cherubs, and then meets Annunziata, who tells him where his next destination is, a sacred church in the sprawling towers of Santa Vigilia. He makes his way there and finds Asterion standing before a kneeling Annunziata. Putting together what's about to happen, the Penitent One lashes out at Asterion, which starts a fight between the two. Despite being guided by his master and being on the cusp of fulfilling his goal, Asterion is killed by the Penitent One, who reclaims the hilt of Mea Culpa. He approaches Annunziata, who admits that a voice from beyond told her that she would be the one to restore Mea Culpa for him. Annunziata complies with the call, putting the hilt against her chest, which the Penitent One pulls on to regain his signature weapon. With the Sword of Guilt restored, the Penitent One sets off to complete the second task assigned to him by Chrysanta. But to call upon her in the final moments, he needs a way to bring her from the dream back into the real world, even if only temporarily. Luckily for him, there is a spell that can do just that. The Prayer of the Penitent One, which he can obtain after traveling to an altar, compelling avatars of his old weapons to manifest in the world, overcoming them in battle, and returning to the altar. But before he can perform this task, one more obstacle stands in his way. Brother Asterion. Shortly after the Penitent One regained Mea Culpa, Asterion came back to life, resurrected by the power of his master. He also gained further insight into what the Penitent One was trying to achieve, and went to Santa Vigilia to stop him. After commenting on how similar the two are, how they're both blessed and cursed to eternally return to sate the whims of a master that is beyond their understanding or reach, Asterion starts another fight with the Penitent One. Despite unleashing the full extent of his skill and power, Brother Asterion is once again defeated by the Penitent One. However, this time, perhaps because of the power of Mea Culpa, Asterion's connection to his master is severed. Driven to despair over not being able to hear his master's voice, Asterion steps off the edge of a building and plummets to his death. With the final defeat of his adversary, the Penitent One sets out and completes the tasks necessary to obtain the Prayer of the Penitent One. After also obtaining the incense of the envoys, he then has everything he needs to complete his quest and sets out to confront the incarnate devotion. Upon defeating the entity, he stays true to his word and before dealing the final blow, calls upon Chrysanta by using the prayer, who takes Mea Culpa and uses it to kill the incarnate devotion. As a reward for killing the being and dealing the miracle its final defeat, the four envoys gather Chrysanta's body and carry her to the holiest of places, where she can rest in peace and glory for the rest of time. Back on Earth, the Penitent One, having given up his place in paradise for Chrysanta, goes to the sea. He removes his helmet, sticks Mea Culpa in the sand, and disappears as the sun sets over the waters of the ocean, ending the story of the Mea Culpa DLC for Blasphemous II. While it was nice to get another chapter in the story and to see some familiar faces again, there were some things in the Mea Culpa DLC that had me scratching my head. For instance, how was Mea Culpa able to be restored without the power of the High Wills who originally created it? It doesn't make sense that it was the miracle that pushed everyone to recreate it, as they were obviously going to use it to destroy the incarnate devotion, which the miracle was using to physically manifest into the world. Recreating Mea Culpa and putting it in their hands is at odds with its own goal. Maybe it was a backup plan of some kind? Or maybe something or someone else from the other side of the dream was working to enact a plan of their own. Someone like Astarion's master. We see in the DLC that the Master does have some power in the real world as he's able to bring Astarion back to life. Maybe he was able to use his power to get Mea Culpa recreated so it could be used for his own goals, which honestly was another miss for the DLC. We never really got to see why the Master was so eager to get the Sword of Guilt into Astarion's hands. It was evident that it was part of some grand master plan, but what was it? It was something that seemed to make Astarion uncomfortable, as he expresses doubt and uneasiness several times in the few moments we get with him. Did the Master plan to use Mea Culpa to do something never seen before? Something truly blasphemous? These questions may be answered in the future, as after the credits of the DLC roll, a scene plays where the glass receptacle holding his body cracks, hinting that we may see Astarion's Master in another form in the future. We'll just have to wait to see what that brings us. While the DLC may have been a bit of a misstep, hopefully the next installment of Blasphemous can learn some lessons from these mistakes and be even better as a result. That'll be it for this one though. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. If you'd like to see more discussions and thoughts on the lore of the DLC and Blasphemous as a whole, check out the Lore Hunter who I mentioned earlier. He has some videos on some theories on the lore that you may find interesting. Alright, last thing before I go, I'd like to mention that all my content is over on Spotify, so feel free to watch or listen over there if that's easier for you. Alright, that's it for this one, so until next time, thank you for watching, and see you later.